Good morning, everyone. We're going to be talking about project-based learning today. It's a teaching method where students learn by actively engaging in real-world and personally meaningful projects. We're going to be even more today, cooking team leader in carpentry and joinery with you. Just a sec.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I'm really excited today. So we're going into the realms of project-based learning, and we've got the curriculum team leader for joinery with us. His name's Ian Moore, and he's going to tell us about this exciting new kind of way of learning that he's been trialing out. So if you just want to say hi, Ian.
Hello, guys. How you doing? Good morning.
Brilliant. So Ian, first of all, could you tell us a little bit about how you've come into, teaching in joinery? You're in the FE sector, what have you been doing prior to it, and how have you landed here?
Well, it was never kind of a planned journey. It never is these sort of things. It's something that just kind of unfolded. I think I initially started out as a bench joiner, cabinet maker, which is something that I found was going to happen naturally due to kind of my academic ability at school. I wasn't somebody that was driven at school. Wasn't somebody that was aiming towards getting good grades. I just knew that, like all the students that come into our kind of sector in my area, tend to have is a passion for working with their hands. So I went into cabinet making initially, making furniture. It's what I did my apprenticeship in, and it was something that I really enjoyed doing. I still do now. It's something I'm really passionate about. And from the cabinet making side of things, I then sort of moved forward into bench joinery and other elements of joinery. It was site joinery, and it was bench joinery, making windows and doors and stairs, and it was all the practical elements of every aspect of carpentry and joinery. And then I got to a point where I thought, right, I've done everything now in this, and I had this like little bit of an itch to kind of move forward and try something different. So I just randomly one day applied for my assessor's award on online, and I started doing that on evening classes. And whilst I was doing that, I seen a job for the prison industry teaching woodwork, and I thought that might be interesting. I think I might have a little look at that and give that a go. So I applied for it with no kind of expectation or anticipation I was going to meet the grade to actually get through the door. But after 6 or 7 months of various kind of hurdles, they got me through the door, and I started teaching as a woodwork instructor in the prison service. But before that, I'd done all different aspects of joinery and building work. So I had my own business for 10 years, building houses, and I also was a project manager on building sites. So I just felt like I'd met my capacity for doing what I needed to do, and I wanted something different. So from the prison service, I then went into the smaller trainer providers, which weren't ideal for in terms of what you kind of have to experience to become um, a teacher or a lecturer. But they give me an opportunity to kind of start honing some skills and standing in front of a class, and sort of alleviating some of those stresses and worries that you get. And then from there, I then moved into Middlesbrough College in 2017, 18, I think it was, and I've been there ever since.
A really kind of varied experience, but focusing around the aspect of joinery and working with wood. So so you've come in, you're now teaching. So you're teaching post 16?
Yes, yeah, post 16.
Yeah, and what kind of levels, what kind of courses are you delivering just to set this kind of project-based learning in context?
Well, I think it's kind of the same as across the board, across the country. We deliver the diploma, which has always kind of been a standard sort of application to our qualification structures, which is the diploma, and then just recently we've moved on to the T level in the last 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I think I'm pretty much in the same pot as everybody else and doing the same um, kind of delivery, the same um, sort of challenges as everybody else across the country, I suppose. So yeah, it's nothing different to what everybody else is doing. I think it's just that we've had to look at things in a different way with the new introduction of the T levels.
So So that's kind of what you're doing right now and how this kind of application of teaching and learning is going to fit in contextually. So if we move over to project-based learning, then what does that kind of mean in your context? What is it?
Well, I think when I initially got intrigued by project-based learning, it was during obviously my teacher training times, and there was like obviously you look at all the theories behind it. It's quite in depth. There's a lot of research involved, and it seems complex. But in terms of what we needed from those theories and what we needed from project-based learning, it happened in an organic fashion. Um, it kind of I looked at what our new challenges were from the T level. And I thought we can't deliver the T level how we've always been delivering the diploma. It doesn't work like that. So I had to look at ways that we could adapt our teaching and sort of pedagogy to kind of meet the needs of the new sort of pace of the new qualification that was coming through. So project-based learning for us was making sure that the students were going to be as rounded as they possibly could moving in out into industry and exposing them to some of the real world projects that they might not necessarily be exposed to throughout their time in college until they come to that abrupt halt when they've actually departed from college. So we thought, right, we need a way of bringing something into the college that is going to establish the learner with all these skills and all these attributes that they're expected to have when they move out into industry or society, for cultural and social development. So project-based learning it sounds like, with the title, it's quite definitive, but there's so many different ways that you could approach it that meet the needs of the student, which is ultimately what you're trying to do, and get them ready for going out into industry.
I mean, when I looked into project-based learning, I mean, a lot of the kind of research points to John Dewey, and a quote from Dewey and Small in 1897. So this is how old this concept is. It says, the teacher is not in the school to impose certain ideas or to form certain habits in the child, but is there as a member of the community to select the influences which shall affect the child and assist him in properly responding to the influences. So really, Dewey is talking about creating members of society and using the community to shape and form understanding for these young people. Is that how you still see project-based learning now, over 100 and something years later?
Well, I think he's correct. I think, well, we are all kind of having to adapt to a social construct. We're all having to adapt to the fact that society is structured in a certain way with certain expectations, and that there is a pot that we're all dropped into at the end of the academic journey. So we have to look at all of those skills and attributes that the students need and make sure that we're developing and we're promoting those throughout um, the teaching journey for the student. So when they go out into society, that they are equipped and skilled with everything that is expected from them, instead of just giving them a bank of information and they're not really sure what they're meant to be doing with that. If they've got the application of those skills and knowledge already, and they've already put their toe into the pool of understanding why and how these are applied, they're going to be ready for industry. They're going to have that cultural capital. They're going to have that understanding of what it is needed from them moving out into the real world. I certainly didn't know when I left school how to act and how to behave. I can remember some of my first days in industry, and not meeting the expectations of my employer for the first sort of 3 to 6 months, until it took me time to adapt to what was expected from me and the way that I presented myself. What they would expect from me, and being autonomous and thinking for myself and applying any sort of skills and knowledge that I've had. And because mine were limited, in terms of my personal experience and my childhood, and what I'd had from school, I wasn't well equipped to go out into society to perform well and demonstrate who I was as a person. That took a lot longer than it should have, really. So yeah, no, I agree with the comments that we're trying to make students more rounded individuals in preparation for moving into society's requirements, I suppose.
And do you feel that in your current situation, your current program, that is central, or do you feel like that's a byproduct of all the other things you're doing? Because we know in education now there's so many things that we need to kind of cram into that curriculum. Does project-based learning fulfill that, or does it become an additional kind of thing that you need to do? It's just that balance. Like, is it creating extra workload, albeit for the greater good, or is it does it fit in naturally?
Well, that was a good question, actually, in terms of what I was thinking at the start, because when I first kind of was introduced to the concept of this, I thought, well, that's a different approach to learning. I quite like the idea of having a different focus for the students, and it's interesting as well, rather than segmented criterion-based learning, where students are hopped across from one little stone to the next in terms of trying to gain a gathering accumulation of knowledge in different sort of chopped up criteria. It gave me the opportunity to think about giving them an end goal. And so if we establish our projects around what is expected within the outcomes, within the learning aims and objectives, and we build a big project which holistically meets the needs of a lot of those criteria, we then only have to look around where the gaps in knowledge are after that, and then fill those gaps in knowledge. And because they're project based and student led, we really get to see the weak points and the strengths from the student in an organic fashion. So they're demonstrating what they know, what they don't know. They're demonstrating what they find interesting, what they don't find interesting. They generally play to their strengths. So if they're playing to their strengths in organic fashion, we then get the opportunity to identify where their weak spots are, where we need to be focusing our attention. And because it is student led, they tend to focus on the areas which you know that it give you a pattern across the board within the class of where we need to focus all of our attention to make sure that they are developing towards the aims and the objectives and the criteria that we need. So I would say it's not create an extra workload down the line, but initially, obviously, the setup of this does take a little bit of time to identify what the needs and the requirements are for the course, and that any projects that you introduce do holistically tick off a lot of the criteria and the aims and the objectives of the course. And it's not just theory based. Obviously, we aim at being in a predominantly practical kind of trade that we're in. Our students come in with the expectation that everything they do is going to be practical. They don't come in to joinery with the anticipation they want to sit down in a classroom once again, like they've done for 16 years, in front of a teacher and be fed information which they're then assessed on in a specific way. They want to be hands-on, they want to be involved in something, they want to take ownership, and they want to see a product at the end of it. So even though the initial setup of what we're trying to achieve can take a little bit of time to establish and identify what they need and what they don't need, it does just leave a small amount of information and gaps in knowledge that you can identify, and it's organic as well in that way. We're not doing it always through rigid assessment. We can see where the students are drawn to, so it fits in well. And I think especially within the context of what we're delivering in joinery, it's I've never thought about it as much in terms of other trade areas, in terms of health and or uh, hair and beauty or any of those aspects. I'm not really sure how it would work within those, but I can't see why it wouldn't work. But everywhere that you go, that you're trying to identify a project that fits in with the structure of your curriculum, you can make it work and you can make it fit. And for me, it's been quite a success so far.
Mm. So if we could get an example then of how you are using project-based learning, so whether it was, last year, this year, could you give us some information on what you went through as a teacher to set it up, and how then it was received by students and by your managers, and then what maybe outcomes you're seeing from this kind of process?
Um, well, initially, it wasn't something that I thought, right, okay, I really want to do project-based learning, and I want everybody to be on board with this, and I want this to be constructed in a way that's going to be part of the curriculum. What happened more so was the fact that I became a little bit stagnant in terms of maintaining my teaching through the necessary requirements of delivery. So in the practical environment, there's a set number of assignments and a set number of assessments that need to be done to show competence in carpentry and joinery. And I felt it was a little bit rigid in its approach. And I started thinking about how can I make this a little bit more interesting for the student, because you could see that moving from one topic to the next topic, um, it wasn't really engaging the student. They didn't have any drive. They thought, why am I doing this? Why am I making part of a door frame? Why am I making and hanging a door? But there's no rationale behind it for them. They couldn't get enthused behind the circumstances that they were in. So I thought I need to change this around a little bit so that they can use the skills and the knowledge that they're applying and put it into some sort of end goal or some sort of end task. And what I noticed was some of the students that we had on course would find it very difficult to engage. They they were waiting for an instruction and they weren't motivated until they had that instruction. They weren't applying themselves to the task and the assessments because they didn't see a point to it. They didn't see any focus towards the end of what they were trying to achieve. So I started developing small little projects within the workshop that they incorporated the criteria and the assessments that they would have to do. So if they were hanging a door and putting the door lining in and they had to build a stud wall, I would make that into one holistic project. And I know this is probably done before. Um, and I knew that they were finding it a little bit more interesting with a written brief and expectation, and how they applied themselves to that and how they went about it was their choice. We'd already given them an instruction and demonstrated this, and they'd already practiced all the small sections of it. So now it was their opportunity to shine and demonstrate their strengths and their weaknesses, and we could identify where they were there was needs for improvement and where the skills, the hand skills were. They had to communicate what they were doing. So there wasn't just, this is an assessment book, let's complete this assessment book. There was now a need to communicate the knowledge that they were reading, and then put that into a practical application. So from that small pot of witnessing the students who were struggling to engage and felt like they were just at school again, they now had a little bit of an end goal. So from that point, I then made the transition to start thinking, right, if we can do this in the college, we need to be bringing what we're doing now into more real life world problems and scenarios that is going to expose them to lots of different development areas that we'd expect from them. So communication skills, um, problem solving, analytical skills, um, critical thinking, that where they're having to take ownership of their project, deliver this project, and demonstrating their areas of strengths and weaknesses, and ticking off a lot of the kind of the expectations as well within the curriculum. Meeting the Gatsby benchmarks, the cultural capital aspect of it, ensuring that the student is leading this process. It gives them that enthusiastic sort of responsibility, and they engage, and they seem to work as a team a lot better. So we went out to a lot of companies externally, and we said, basically, we can offer these services. You give us a project, we'll deliver that project from start to finish. So one of the good initial projects I have a friend who's an actor, and he said to me, look, we're looking for a set build for one of our sets. Would any of your students be interested in this? So we brought the actual problem and scenario to the students in the workshop. We got them to research, design, um, uh, gather the resources, contact suppliers, um, identify the problem that they had. They had to think about how they were going to approach the problem. They had to think about all the solutions and how they would actually take this project from introduction through to completion. And the enthusiasm and the change in the students once we give them this project with an end goal that was real life was it was something that it was just such a pleasure to see as a teacher. It wasn't coming in and motivating and driving the students. They were asking me questions of saying, when do we do this? When is our next opportunity to get out onto the site to see what we need to see? And they followed this project from start to finish all the way through. And the end result was fantastic. They actually delivered the project to site. They installed the project, and the feedback on it was fantastic. And this, what they produce now, is now in a film which has gone to international film festivals and won awards. Has now been considered. So they've been part of that, and their pride, their passion, and enthusiasm for that project. It was I think it was a turning point for me for realizing what the benefits were for moving into project-based learning. It takes the ownership from us trying to drive the information to the students, leading, and it being a student-led flipped learning session where they are telling us information. And also, I suppose, they're exposing themselves to information that we would never normally probably expect them to know, which is through their research elements and delivery. So that's basically how we kind of started off with the introduction of project-based learning.
So thank you for sharing, and that sounds amazing. And I can't even imagine how proud you must be of your students and how proud they must be of themselves. Um, what I'd like to know, just picking on some of the things you said, what level of student um, did this particular project with the set build that's gone into international films, like internationally recognized film?
The students at the time, well, it was a mixture. We put it across the board to the students. So we give a range of students from level 1 all the way through to T levels the opportunity to be
Wow,
involved in the full process. So level 1s
wow.
were helping with the production of the materials and the cutting lists, identifying the correct materials they needed, and the research tasks. And
Okay.
the T levels at the end of it, they went off and actually installed the project. So everybody had an
Wow.
element of this project, which was great. So it just meant that everybody knew what was going on, and there was discussion amongst the groups as well, which,
So
on break
the
times.
students that wouldn't necessarily ever work together because they were on different levels were actually pooling their strengths and their resources to do one
Yes,
big
yeah,
project.
yeah, it was,
That's quite phenomenal, to be fair, because normally it's like, well, these are level ones, and these are T
yes,
levels, and you
yeah,
keep them apart, and they do their things, and they do their curriculum, and that's really, again, probably an indication of how it is in the real world. Because you go to work, senior leaders working with brand new teachers, you have to work together with all levels, all types, and that's
yeah,
really quite impressive.
yeah. It's I suppose all of our projects have run like that. And when I first started the college at Middlesbrough College, the first thing I did when I started there, they had a project they took on board, and they weren't sure how to attack it. And we brought all of the levels together, and they worked really well together. And that always sort of had a bit of a seed planted in terms of taking this forward and doing something with it eventually along the line. And I always got put off it from actually completing this, because we know that as teachers we've got very limited time, and all the peripheral kind of activities that we're exposed to as well that we have to complete kind of dilutes our main teaching requirements, and we get put off of trying something new or doing something different because the it takes up time that we don't feel like we've got, and we stick to the rigid structures just so that we can achieve the outcomes. But applying this new kind of method of teaching to the joinery environment has really worked and it's flourished.
So, and another question I had about that particular project was how, I mean, you obviously had a contact that then you utilized to create this project. How easy is it to then find these real or, create these real tangible projects if you don't have those networks, or if you're new into teaching, you haven't quite got that confidence? Like, what do you need to have to get this going?
Well, to be honest, the capacity to pick up the phone. There's so many local community projects which are crying out for some sort of support that don't have the financial structure there to complete it themselves. And colleges have generally a fantastic setup and infrastructure in terms of real world industry tools and resources that they can apply to, free of charge, technically. These external companies, when you contact them, some of them, if there's a care home or the local cricket club or a community hall, or any companies in the area that don't have the resources to develop or promote or extend what they need within their companies to to move things forward, uh, we can offer that opportunity. So usually they're jumping at you to kind of take these opportunities. Yes, I would love it if you could come in and refit the kitchen. We would love it if you could come and do the paneling. We'd love you to do some sort of community work in the garden there. There's always something there, and all you have to do is just ring up a few local companies, a few local, could be social action groups, anything. And there's always somebody sort of that said, oh, I know somebody that needs this developed. I know somebody who needs a little bit of work carried out there. And one leads on to the next. And it was just me putting out my voice and saying, does anybody need any work done? Sending a few emails, making a few phone calls, and then it just snowballed. And now we're inundated with work that we just can't get to and complete at the present time. So it is a little bit frustrating because there's so many missed opportunities for us, but it just goes to show how much available project work there is out there that you can use in alignment with your curriculum.
That's phenomenal. And you mentioned how students develop that intrinsic motivation. So it's no more you flogging them to get to class. It's no more, you kind of, as you said, feeding them, like they are cooking and creating their own meals of knowledge, really. So what did you see in your students in terms of that intrinsic motivation? What major differences did you notice, like in terms of those key performance indicators that were all measured against? What was your achievement like? What was your attendance like? All of those other things that, no matter how fun a lesson is, we need to have that tangible impact because we are accountable as organization and practitioners. So what was your data like? The boring stuff.
Well, I think what is one example is that we had one group which came in into the college, and they were supposed to be our higher sort of academic achieving group. So generally, with the patterns behaviour that come with that type of group is, the attendance is a bit higher, the work completion, the application to the course itself generally seems to be a little bit higher. But we had, for some reason, quite an opposing sort of contradiction to what our expectations were at those times in terms of the student completing the course needs. So when we took it upon ourselves to start introducing small projects within that group, the attitudes of some of the learners within that group, which we found very difficult from the start of the course, we'd had so many meetings, one-to-ones, spoke to parents, it completely flipped within the space of a week. We had at least 3 or 4 or 5 students who used to work in a group together. That you always get a pocket of students which I think find it difficult to engage on the course initially, are a little bit resistant to following, the channels of authority and structures of education. And because they felt like it was their project, they felt like it was their taking ownership of it. It was up to them what the outcome was. They felt like they had an opportunity to demonstrate their strengths. They had an opportunity to say, well, I know I'm good at these aspects. I know I'm good at this. So I'm going to have, they got excited by the prospect of being able to complete this and show me what they were made of, rather than just fall into a lull of my expectations. So I think it maintained this sort of consistency of positive engagement from the students. So you could see that they were attending class more. Their attendance did go up, and their attitudes and behaviours completely transformed. They were talking to us with a receptive attitude. They were so passionate about the project. I know it sounds a little bit, I don't know, a little bit cheesy and a little bit sort of cliche. Oh, they've miraculously made a U-turn, but they did. We were looking at each other as tutors going into the room when they were already getting themselves changed and going onto the shop floor, and they'd already had their tools out before we'd even asked them, rather than standing and talking in the waiting area. So we could see the benefits from it instantaneously, and for us to see that, it's what we're there for. We want students to come through and be as passionate and enthusiastic about what we're trying to instill into the student, to make them ready for industry, because they think that they know everything they need to know to go out into society. And we could see them adapting and taking on board everything that we wanted them to start learning, but doing it off their own back and their own merit. So attendance, behavior, attitude, we've seen positive kind of change of direction with that, I suppose. And I think that's what gave us the drive and enthusiasm to say, right, okay, we need to start incorporating this into our teaching.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher, or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more, and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
According to reports on the BBC News website, the EU wants to agree a deal with the UK that would make it easier for people aged between 18 and 30 to study abroad in the wake of Brexit. The European Commission says it would be a limited arrangement, not the restoration of freedom of movement. The UK already has schemes with some non-EU countries, and these allow people to come to the UK for up to 2 years. Downing Street says it's open to extending this to individual EU members rather than throughout the EU, but prefers country-by-country deals. The proposed EU scheme has time limits, and UK participants would only be able to stay in the EU country that accepted them. The report goes on to say that it would reduce controls on young people moving between the UK and EU. The European Commission says it is stepping in after the UK approached several EU countries to discuss deals. The Commission says it risked differential treatment of EU citizens, and there should be a bloc-wide deal for equality. The UK turned down an offer to continue participating in the EU's Erasmus student exchange after Brexit, but did replace it with the Turing scheme, which provides exchanges worldwide. The BBC South East team have covered concerns expressed by some students that they may run out of ADHD medication during the upcoming exam period. Some students have reported rationing their medication in order to stretch it out following reports of shortages due to an increase in demand and manufacturing issues. ADHD medications are often controlled drugs, which means prescriptions are limited to a month's supply, although some pharmacies also struggle to fill even this. The NHS advises against any changes of dosage without medical advice, but families continue to feel anxious about the possibility of young people struggling through the exam season. The Guardian reports on findings from communications regulator Ofcom, which suggests that a quarter of 3 and 4-year-olds in the UK now own a smartphone. Half of children under 13 are on social media. Online activity by infant school-aged children is rising. These findings could boost the argument of those urging the government to clamp down on social media and phone use by young children. A consultation will likely be launched in coming weeks, according to sources in government. This could include a proposal to ban mobile phone sales to under 16s, one to make it easier for parents to use parental controls on devices, and one to raise the minimum age for social media sites from 13 to 16. Michelle Donlan, Technology Secretary, said children as young as 5 should not be accessing social media. The Ofcom figures come amid what The Guardian says is growing evidence of the impact of social media use amongst children, and the US government refers to it as a profound risk to mental health. The book The Anxious Generation, published in March by a US academic, has been cited as influencing thinking in number 10. The Ofcom survey was based on 2,480 parents of children aged between 3 and 17. The TES reports that absence rates are up again according to latest DFE figures. This is compared with spring 2022 to 23. This is despite the government's ongoing attendance drive. Overall absence for last term was 7.3%, slightly up on the 7% in the previous year. The Department for Education said the rise was likely to have been caused by a higher level of illness absence. The proportion of persistently absent pupils has also slightly increased to 21.9% of pupils who are missing 10% or more half days. The figures for disadvantaged pupils are worse when compared to their peers. Full details of the latest data can be found on TES.com. Finally, the TES also features a report that the Department for Education does not intend to replace current progress measures, known as Progress 8, for the next 2 years. After exploring alternatives, there will be no progress measures published for schools in England in 2024 to 25 or 2025 to 26. The cancellation of Year 6 SATs during the pandemic meant that there was no Key Stage 2 attainment data available as a baseline for Progress 8 calculations. Headline attainment measures will still be published and grading will take place as normal. The Department for Education says it intends to return to Progress 8 in 2026 to 27. Teaching unions welcomed the announcement, but some described it as a missed opportunity to rethink performance tables overall. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
So I do love how obviously it does sound positive and so beneficial for all of your students and everyone involved, including the local community with all of these kind of projects you're doing. Now let's talk about some of the difficulties, because I can't imagine anything that you do in teaching is 100% smooth sailing. No. So what kind of challenges have you faced? How did you overcome them and what still needs to be overcome?
Well, the obvious, glaringly obvious, is the time restrictions on it. I've had to obviously invest a lot of time into these project developments or structuring and meeting the needs of the curriculum in my own time, I suppose, time outside of the teaching requirements, because it was an additional add-on to what my daily routines or expectations were. So adding this and setting this up initially was time consuming and it was challenging, and I suppose it was also hard to kind of get the other teachers on board with adopting this new philosophy through teaching. it became, I suppose, it can be a little bit draining in terms of there is a lot of work for you to kind of do behind the scenes, communicating with prospective project coordinators. All of those elements do take time, and that was the biggest issue for us. It was, do we have the time, the resources, the passion, and enthusiasm for us as teachers to keep this consistent and keep pushing this forward? And will it work? Will it meet the needs of the curriculum? Are we just going to gather data that's non-relevant, has no application, and we're wasting the time of the students? So setting that up and applying and making sure that all of the learning aims, objectives, and all the criteria actually meets the needs of any projects that we were driving forward, and developing an indicative content that we could measure their journey against, did take considerable kind of amount of time to put into that. But if you see the results from what you get firsthand, or you were given the opportunity to see the benefits of it, I think that's what drives you forward and offers you the passion and enthusiasm for that. So it was a bit of a challenge. I think it was the T level that drove the change, because of the way the T level is assessed and delivered. It was completely different, a contradiction to the diploma. So we looked at what needed to be achieved. I thought, how and why, what's the best way we go about this? And I'm not going to say it's been an easy journey. It's been difficult, and it still is. It's still in progress. But from what we see from it, and what it brings to my own teaching experiences and how I feel about it, and my enthusiasm on these projects, seeing an end goal for myself is fantastic as well. Getting up in the morning and not just teaching what we have to teach, but putting that into a project and getting out and about with the students and installing the work that we're making, and communicating with different people from different backgrounds, working from people in areas, could be impoverished areas that people need support and help, or working on a film set with actors and directors that work in Hollywood. It's so many sort of diverse environments. It's absolutely fantastic, and I think that's kind of overwhelmed any challenges or any sort of I don't know, conflict that we've had moving forward through the process.
What was the support like from your kind of leaders, your managers? Because I can imagine some people might be thinking, yeah, I'd love to take the leap, but they're not sure if, say, their senior leaders will understand how it's implemented and how it fits. So, what would you advise someone who's thinking about it but not sure how to go about getting it started?
I think because I was given the autonomy to take the lead and develop these projects. At first I didn't really kind of inform my upper management of my intentions and my processes. I just seen the outcome of it and thought, this is something we need to work towards. And we're always encouraged to develop the student and extend them beyond the requirements of the course needs. So I thought this is a fantastic opportunity to do so. So when I did approach um, management in my area and told them what we were doing, um, it was kind of with an end product in place that we'd already achieved. So I did the film project off my own back, and we completed it and installed it. And then obviously we've got a lot of documented video that we had from that, and we showed that to the management team, and they thought it was fantastic. And so they've always put projects in place and community projects in place for us to take advantage of over the period of time over the course of the terms. But I think what I did is I tried to make it a little bit more structured and a little more definitive. And if I was going to say to anybody, moving forward, I would say put the groundwork in first. Make sure that you've got some contacts and you've got some sort of structure to what you're intending to do. So a project itself isn't that difficult to do. We've all done it, being in industry. It's just making sure that we align it with the student development. We can justify what we're doing, and that management will be on board with what you're trying to achieve. Because if they can't see your vision and they can't see the benefits of it, it's going to be difficult for them to kind of promote and I suppose allow you to express what you really need to gain the outcomes that you're expecting from this in the first place.
That's really good, and I like the way you made those distinctions about, making sure it's beyond a project, because project-based learning is different to learning via a project. The concepts are different, and there are distinctions between the two. So I think what you kind of explained there really was project-based learning, where it's kind of that holistic development of the student that's led by the student, whereas a student completing a project is a different thing. And really there seems to be a lot of heated debate about, doing projects and project-based learning and that kind of experiential learning, and whether there is a tangible impact. And I know in your experience, you said, it's been positive, and that students have been positive, and that, with the hard effort has been a reward. Why do you think there isn't more or more? Why don't you think vocational learning, especially in areas like joinery and carpentry, that more people aren't using it? What is the barrier? It sounds amazing. It seems to be really good. It aligns with what we expect in industry. It prepares them for what they're going to do out there in the real world. Why has it gone back to these bitty workbooks and packs that they complete in isolation and in modularized units or whatever? What's happened?
I think it's because generally, we have to have achievement. We have to have and demonstrate that we are meeting the requirements of the course, and a certain amount of students are achieving, and they are meeting the exam conditions, and they're working towards achieving those exams. And that's how we're measured as practitioners. We're measured on how well those students get through in terms of what their end results are. And I think digressing from that, you can feel like you're diluting your teaching practices. And if you feel like you're not working towards the end goals, specifically, and meeting those criterion segmented based outcomes that the governing bodies expect us to meet the standards, I think you feel like you're on a different path. I think you feel like you're not doing justice to the student by preparing them for the exam. But you have to look at it as a bigger picture. um, you have to look at what are we really preparing the student for. We have to get them through their exam, and generally that process um, can be addressed through classroom delivery. And I'm not saying we can take away from that, and that doesn't have to be done. There's always going to be gaps in knowledge. But if we give the student to apply what they already know and recognize prior learning into a project, into a goal that they've taken ownership of, or a product which they are producing that's relevant to real world application, the students enjoy that, and you can see that. And I think it's hard for us to walk away from what we know in terms of our delivery models, our pedagogy, to start saying then, okay, the outcomes are based on what these students are now going to be exposing themselves to through their own autonomous application. And I think that is the hard part of it. I think it's because you're entrusting the student with their own development, and then you're relying on the outcome of that to say, are they making progress? Are they not making progress? Rather than saying, here's the information. I want you to learn this information, and I'm going to assess you on that at the end. You're now giving them the opportunity to start exposing themselves to a varied number of criteria and a lot of information they probably wouldn't be exposed to in the actual course itself. So the cultural element of it is fantastic. If I'm asking them to look at sustainability rather than just talking about sustainability, they're now having to research this in a project context, which they might now start looking at sustainability across the world and how it affects different cultures and the world itself, and the economy and the politics. And it opens up a lot of doors behind what they're actually trying to do, rather than me saying, focus your attention down this route, make sure this is what you achieve at the end of it, and that's what you're going to be assessed on. They now broaden their horizon, the scope of knowledge which they are trying to adopt, and then I can see whether they have progressed or they've developed any of the skills that I'm looking for in terms of the criteria. Because the project is guided; it's not just an open-ended project. There's elements to it when we write a question or an outcome that we need them to kind of achieve in terms of research tasks or consideration points, and then being analytical and by in their processes, so that the problem solving throughout, we do guide that. It's not just left as a free for all. So I think as a whole, I think the challenges and the difficulty is that we find it hard to digress away from what we already know. And obviously, I've just been in teaching a very short amount of time, but I have had the opportunity to expose myself to a range of qualifications and the expectations from those qualifications. I think the new sort of direction is trying to drive the student in a way that they recognize their own learning, their own strengths and weaknesses. They have the opportunity to consistently reflect based on their learning progression that they've identified themselves.
Excellent. Excellent. So I'm just going to give another quote from Strobel and Van Barneveld in 2009. They did obviously a accumulation of the effectiveness of project-based learning, and they said that findings indicate that project-based learning was superior when it comes to long-term retention, skill development, and satisfaction of students and teachers, while traditional approaches were more effective for the short-term retention as measured by standardized board exams. So they do go into detail and discuss the implications. And I think that quite nicely summarizes what you were just saying there, in terms of that, what are we trying to do in the bigger picture? And if it's about creating the next generation of carpenters and joiners, then this is probably better for them long term, passing college and going into employment. Whereas if we're thinking about the 9 months they're with you in that year and how we need to get them to that exam and exam readiness, maybe, does it fulfill all of that? But my question now is going to be, can it be both? So can they do that project-based thing it's solely, singularly, and still be effectively ready to pass, say, the T-level exams? Or do you need to do a bit of both?
Definitely a bit of both. I think ultimately we can't leave the outcomes to the student, because if we're trying to prepare them ultimately for a very rigid, structured endpoint assessment, whether that's an employer set project or whether it's written work, we are going to have to give them some processes and application of work and study that is going to meet the needs and the requirements of that. But I think it's holistically gathering all of that information and putting it into practical application, especially as a joiner. Learning by doing is probably the most prominent factor in that whole scenario. So if we get the student to be learning throughout by actually carrying out and developing their schemas for long-term memory, so that they're going out to industry with work readiness skills rather than just also get them to recall information for an exam, which then gives them that standard or of a level of achievement so they can demonstrate that they have that knowledge. It doesn't always necessarily mean that they're going to carry that out into the industry, but at that point, at that assessment point, we've got to get them ready to meet the governing body's needs and requirements. So I suppose it's just kind of meeting lots of elements of different expectations, but also doing our best to make sure that whatever they're learning, that they get an opportunity to put it into practice, take it out into society, and develop skills that they didn't know they really had, like communication skills and working as a team and being collaborative learning, and all these things that we can talk about until we're blue in the face. But if you put that in front of the student and allow them to take charge of that, you see them thrive in different environments. That's one student who won't sit still in the classroom, who doesn't want to finish question 1, 2, and 3, but you go out and you say to them, right, I want somebody to go and take charge of, installing the door frame over there and lead a team, and they excel in that. And that gives you the opportunity to align them with what society expects and then also meet the course requirements, which is very difficult to do. But I think it brings it all together through the project-based learning. It gives them an opportunity to demonstrate skills you wouldn't necessarily see in the classroom. And it also gives you an opportunity to see the students' strengths, and sometimes the strengths overshadow and kind of dilute all of their weaknesses, and it brings everything together for them, and it gives them a rationale as to why they're doing what they're doing.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
So, factoring in all of those challenges, all of the positive that you were talking about, which sounds like there's more positives than there are negatives, which is great. And discussing how you probably need a little bit of a mix between having those great experiences in project-based learning, but then obviously factoring in the regulations required for the exams and other assessment boards. What would you kind of say is your next step? What would you say that, do you know what, to do this year on year, this is how I need to develop as a facilitator instructor, and what would you like to see happen in, say, the next couple of years in your delivery in joinery?
I think what we did, we had a little bit of a taste for what my expectations were, or the team's expectations were for this, when we were asked to develop a transition program to go onto the T level. And the transition program is it's making sure that they have the skills and all of the sort of the platforms that they need, like problem solving and being analytical and presentation skills, all of those different aspects that they needed to go onto the T level, which is ultimately where everything seems to be heading at the moment. It doesn't seem to be like it's going away anytime soon. So the transition course had to be adapted, which effectively is just a diploma. It's a diploma with a few other key skills that we have to put into there to make sure that they've got a taste for the moving on to the T level. We had to restructure and adapt that diploma in a way so that at the end of each learning aim, with a bank of learning criteria that they had to achieve to get to the end of that, that we incorporated that into some sort of structured project work so that we could allow them to work on a project that connected all of these different learning aims, objectives and outcomes. And we had the opportunity to see how they would apply themselves to each one of those projects, because there wouldn't be just one project for the whole year. There'd be a range of projects which had different outcomes, different expectations, and extracted different elements and strengths from the students throughout. And then when we write up what we're expecting from that, our indicative content, and we mark it against that, we get a pattern of where the strengths and the weaknesses are within the students. And obviously we've already done an extensive initial assessment to see where we think their strengths are for each individual student. We can group those accordingly in the room to make sure that each student is balanced and it's got a balanced application through the delivery of the main structure. So in the next couple of years, I'm hoping that we've developed a set bank of different projects for the theory aspect. So that tie in with the expectations of the governing bodies to meet the exam conditions, but also are going to extend the thinking of the learner that we can also take into the practical environment. So that works both ways as well. The practical tasks that we have, we also bring that into the theory. So we would allow them to do the research tasks as part of their theory development and needs for the exams. But we'd also, what we'd do is we'd map that against their criteria. So if they're doing a project, what are they meeting in terms of their criteria? Are they doing their math skills? Are they working out Pythagoras? Have they learned how to do first fix application of putting in door frames? Do they know about sustainability? Do they know about the health and safety elements? A project allows you to do all of those. So if I can establish a bank of different projects, which is what we're writing at the moment, is trying to establish different projects that the student can have in alignment with the criteria expectations for the course. It will be more structured and fluent, and that's the problem, is that we need consistency so that we can sort of measure whether this is actually working year on year. And I think that's the hard part about all of this, is it's taken a long time to think about and set up, and making sure that the team that I've got are all on board and everybody's willing to put that extra effort in to get where we need to go. So moving forward, I think we have to be preparing the students for T levels. And we have to be making sure that they are ready to make that transition, because anybody who comes onto a diploma, our main focus is trying to get them onto a T level for the 2-year course. If they haven't come in with the entry grades, what can we do to get them in a position so that when we see them at the end of year 1 or the end of year 2, we can say you've developed the skills, the knowledge, and the behaviors that you need to get onto this T level, so that you're now meeting the needs and the requirements of industry expectations, because obviously the T level's been designed around employers' needs.
Mm. It is it's a hard balance, isn't it? And you seem to, be doing it really well, and it's so encouraging to hear, you've got the support of your teammates, your students, your managers to kind of do this for your learners, and to see a positive impact of it. Um, I've got another kind of little bit of research here from Solomon and Globerson, 1989. And they talk about social loafing and the free rider effect. So social loafing is when basically students exert less effort towards projects when working in groups than when they do alone. So like, because they're working in a group, they kind of hold back a little bit because they go at the pace of the group than what they would do if they were like steamrolling ahead and working independently. And it's also seen in ideas like the free rider effect, where students don't put in their full effort because other group members will compensate for them, like, oh, I won't do it, someone else will pick it up, kind of thing. Um, and their argument is that because you get free riders in group situations and in project situations, that some students might then go into that social loafing when you're slicing who does what, and who puts in less effort, and all of that kind of stuff. Have you seen that kind of phenomena in your project-based learning? And are you seeing students that might, if they were working alone, they might have completed that faster and better, but because of the having to carry the slower free riders, um, they're not? And could you talk about how, Sen might fit into these kind of phenomena, like the Sen students and the adaptations, or is that something you don't see?
I think what you're saying there basically is that you see that happen everywhere across the board. No matter what you teach, how you teach, there's always going to be a student or a couple of students that don't have the passion and enthusiasm to complete the course for whatever reason that is, whether it's the send issues there, or which is personal restrictions on how they apply themselves, or whether the student is just not motivated or enthused by the process of learning that they've been doing for the last 16 years, which is always quite difficult. I think to try and alleviate these problems when we do the project-based learning is making sure that if we're doing it in groups, which we generally try to do, small groups, that we group accordingly, that we make sure that we balance the groups out so that, I know that's standard in the past anyway. Whenever you're doing group activities in the classroom, you try and lift one student up through the use of a stronger student. And we have to make sure that we know our students well, and that's through the initial assessment process, I think, making sure that we get to know them very quickly, that we understand what their needs and their requirements are before we start applying them to the different groups that we put them into. And if there is a student within that project-based learning. Each student generally has some sort of role or responsibility within that project. So you can see straight away if that student is completing what the requirements of that task is, because it's going to let down the group. It's going to let the group know that there isn't something being done that needs to be done to achieve the overall project. So I suppose that motivates the student. You could say that it wedges them into a corner where they've got no choice but to apply themselves, and then they feel an obligation just to keep up because through peer pressure. But it drives them. It gives them that motivation to move forward, and because there is an end product, and there's a goal to all of this. They got to achieve something. You find that these students do adapt to their surroundings, and they do adapt to the needs of what the group is asking them to do. And I think we all do that to a certain extent. It's human nature. You don't want to let the site down unless there's some real obstacle in the way of the student that is not enabling them to do so. So if we've got a student with um, certain difficulties that they have through SEND needs. If there's dyslexia, and there's other students in the group, that gives them an opportunity to support them, reading out loud for them, and then allowing them to digest that information as a group, listening from a different point of view, rather than sitting on their own, listening on headphones in the classroom, trying to have the computer dictate to them, or they don't feel like they can keep up with the speed of their writing, but they're very good at communicating with their talking and their presentation skills. It gives the holistic kind of opportunity to show those strengths, and it doesn't hinder them moving forward in what they're trying to achieve with the end goal, because there's not a set structured component. And if they feel they've got a strong point, or they have an opportunity to present themselves in a better way or demonstrate their skills in a better way, they get the opportunity to have that conversation with the group and identify which part of the project they would like to complete to demonstrate their skills. So they all work to their strengths effectively, which gives them that confidence to actually engage within the activity, and it promotes kind of the outcome and what you want for their expectations. Really, I think it has lots of benefits, but I suppose, as you say, it could also go the other way. It could have a counter effect, and the group could be affected negatively by it, by one student not being engaged in that. But there's always going to be an element statistically of that happening, and you have to work and be dynamic in that, I suppose, as you go.
I suppose that's where obviously the teaching staff come in to help support and regulate that. And you get that in real life, don't you? I mean, I know I've been in situations working, and I've thought, oh well, why am I doing this, and so isn't pulling their weight. And I suppose that's another indicator of how these guys will manage it when they enter, the labour market and their workforce, because
Yeah,
we're not all working at the same capacity at the same time, are we? And that's just human nature, I suppose.
yeah.
Um, Right, we are running out of time,
Okay.
so we are going to wrap up now. But a massive, massive thank you. It's been really enlightening and quite inspirational to hear about how project-based learning can have all of these mutually beneficial, positive impacts. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Ian. I hope you've enjoyed explaining all of your
No,
wisdoms.
yeah, very,
It-
very limited, but it's just speaking from experience, and I enjoy the process. So if anybody wants to try this and anybody's interested in doing project-based learning, I would most definitely recommend it. And I think you would find a little bit more of a spark and enthusiasm for how you actually, develop your teaching skills as well. So.
Oh, fantastic. So is there anything else you'd like to say, Ian, before we wrap this up this morning?
Um, I don't think so. Just apart from thank you for having me on board, and I'm not the most experienced in this, but if I can do this, and I can adapt it, and I can develop with these new challenges, I think anybody who's feeling daunted, or anybody who feels like there's something, they want to try something new with that element of fear of failure, then just give it a go and try it, because I'm by no means the most effective teaching practitioner out there, and I'm very new to this environment. So, it's if I can make it work and I can see benefits from it, I think there's a large proportion of people out there that could also do so.
Oh, you're so modest, modest, modest Ian. Um, And I'm sure if anyone's got any questions, they can get in touch with you on LinkedIn. You can find Ian there if you want to pop him a message and ask a little bit more about project-based learning. I'm sure Ian would be happy to respond, won't you, Ian?
By all means, yes.
Well, thank you very much, and see you again next time, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.